and whether or not they believe you're gonna make it, so that they believe you should be defended. I feel like Joe Harris was a more mandatory thing to get back than Kyrie Irving. I know that sounds crazy, but I really believe that because of what we found in Bembry and the resurgence of Nick Claxton. Nick Claxton coming back, Joe Harris coming back has so much to do with us winning. It's so important to our winning that I know you're gonna now. Now I'm gonna give you an opportunity to tell me why that controversial statement is wrong.
No, I actually do agree with you, and I was actually going to take it a step further and say, do you think, that if, uh, my dad actually posed this question to me, and I think it's a good question I wanted to ask to you. Do you think that if Harden looked like this a couple weeks ago, that Marks and Sai and Nash would have pushed harder back on KD, being like, we need Kyrie back, because they would have been like, look, it looks like James is different? Or do you think those two things are basically not even really related?
I don't think they're related because of the amount of effort they have to exert
Yeah.
to get to this point. What Kyrie does for you, and which is why it's hard to say what I'm saying, but what Kyrie does for you is it's another horse that pulls the tractor, or that pulls the cart. You know what I'm saying? Like he what Kyrie does is KD's minutes are going to go down to 29, 31, 32 versus 38, 39, 40.
Right.
And that is important in a different way than when I'm just talking about the level of quality of basketball, because the next thing I want to talk about is starting fives. Now that we got Kyrie back, now that we've discussed as much as there is to discuss, that we went to LA, big city of dreams. And we got some revenge for Snoop Dogg crushing the buildings so long ago. Um, um, Now that we've gotten all that conversation out of the way, we got to talk about who plays, right? Who's your starting five, and who's your ending five? I think that's almost as important as who starts. But who's going to start games for you, and who's going to be the five that's on the floor to end games for you in the playoffs? Not regular season, in the playoffs.
So, I mean, I think a lot. I mean, I guess we're talking about this from a general perspective, right? Because the NBA is now all matchup dependent. I mean, I saw what you had tweeted, and I do agree with you. I mean, I think that quote unquote like death type lineup with the big three plus Harris and Mills is like a offensive, like, I don't even have the right word for it,
I,
because
I call I call that lineup the Oblivion
yeah, I mean, like, it's
Five.
basically impossible to guard, and like, it honestly isn't even like a horrendous defensive lineup, because I think Patty's actually shown something on defense, and in the playoffs, like, I was impressed with Kyrie and Harden's defense before, like, pre-injuries. So like, it's not like, there's not a massive weak link in it, but um I do think that.
Patty has never shot this wide open in his career.
No, right, exactly. Like, and
Like,
but I also agree with you what you said, in that, like, you got to have Claxton in there to a certain extent. The only issue I have, and I know that um, Bam feels strongly about this, and I do agree with him. Claxton is an unbelievable, like, perimeter on ball defender, and he actually has become really good at altering shots in the paint and even
they play
blocking
different
shots.
defense when Claxton plays. When
But he
Claxton's off the floor, they don't switch.
but
But
the
when
but
Claxton's on the floor, they switch,
but
and they should.
the only thing that he really does struggle with is he's just not a great rebounder. And the issue is that when you have him in, you basically either need KD to play a really large rebounding role, which is obviously a little concerning, and or you need to have one of the other bigs in, if like assuming that there's another big playing on the floor who can rebound, because of his issues. And so then you get into a little bit of an offensive issue, because let's say Claxton's in, they're getting killed on the boards. All right, that means that you have to put in LaMarcus or Blake, which does hurt the spacing, even though LaMarcus obviously has shot really well this year, and maybe LaMarcus is the right guy to pair them with. But then you just got to be more careful on who the other three are in, right? Because you can't, it seems like in the playoffs, you can't have a lineup that has Claxton and Bembry and like probably Aldridge, because then you have too many guys who really don't have a reliable 3-point shot in there.
Yeah, yeah. The way I see it is when a game starts, right? You don't want to start a game with jump shooting per se. You don't want to try to bury the team. You want to basically give them body blows early on, mix in those shithouse Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge front court combinations that'll see some extended minutes with one of KD, Kyrie, or James, and or two in different mixes, which is, the more I think about it, it's more how embarrassing the riches are on this team. But when you end games, when the game starts to go downhill, and that's at the end of games, typically in the NBA, like the first 3 quarters, it's a slog fest. It's a game of runs. But then in the fourth quarter, when you want to have a team, so I didn't even say what my lineups are. So my lineup would be to start the games would be Harden, Kyrie, KD, Bembry, right, in a pseudo 4 position, right? That lets KD and him, lets KD and Bembry kind of interchange between 3 and 4, like where it's beneficial, and then have Claxton play the other side. And the reason why you do that is because you have just a ton of dependable scoring. You need a little bit of defense. Make them have to play or be concerned about scoring at first, and then you end games with Harden, Kyrie, Mills, Joe, and you play Kevin Durant at the 5, which is something you've never heard me say. But at the end of games, you're just putting teams away. You're playing downhill basketball. You're just basically putting a team out there that just can't be guarded. And then another way of looking at that team, right, is, right, you've got a 34% shooter in Harden,
Yep.
right, who I think is, that number by the end of the season be closer to 36 or 38.
Yep.
You've got a 40% 3-point shooter in Kyrie, right, as your second player on the court. Then your third player on the court is a 44% shooter in Joe Harris, and a 46% shooter in a much more clutch shooter who's never shot this wide open in his life, in Patty Mills. And then you've got 45% 3-point shooter last year in KD. That is the Oblivion 5, ladies and gentlemen. You can't death lineup. There was weaknesses in the death line. There are no weaknesses in this lineup. You can't guard this lineup.
I have 2 comments here. I'm going to start from the back, which is the death lineup. The thing that I like the most about the Oblivion death lineup is that we've seen that the Nets kind of at the end of games let up on leads, and I think that lineup basically, as you said, puts the basically stops all possible bleeding, because you have the 5 most skilled and best offensive players on, which I love.
You could play downhill basketball, is what I mean. Like you could you could have the ball in Kyrie's hand, dribble penetrate, with reckless abandon, and then you're kicking. You're not even thinking about who you're kicking to. You're just kicking the ball left and right. And then if you are a defense and you have a wing of Joe Harris on the left hand side and Patty Mills on the right hand side, and you've got Kyrie and Harden at the top of the key, what do you do? There's nothing you can do. It's over.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I also think so. Do you think, in commenting on the starting lineup, because your starting lineup, right, has, I know Bembry's been shooting decently from corner threes, but he's obviously not like a quote-unquote three-point shooter. So do you basically think, and I honestly now I'm having a hard time remembering what it was like having all three of them on the floor at once. Do you think that you can have Bembry and Claxton with those big three because the big three are so good that it doesn't really matter if you don't have two good shooters with them, or at least one other shooter with them?
So to start the game, like, I'm one of those believers that you should start the game with a dunk, a pick and roll, a set play.
Yeah, I like that.
Hard to do when you have the three players that. When you have Kyrie, KD, and James Harden, the best offense might just be ISO, like take turns basketball. The worst form of basketball there is, but it doesn't work because you usually at best have two guys that are really good to play one-on-one. But the Nets have three guys that if you were saying who are the three best one-on-one players in basketball, you probably wouldn't say LeBron James. It's a different question than asking who's the best basketball player. The best basketball player to me is probably Giannis. Just if I'm being honest in terms of everything Giannis does and how dependable he is health-wise. But the greatest basketball player is KD, one, and the best one-on-one players in the world is Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. So the best offense to start a game is going to have some ISO in it. But in that ISO or in that pick and roll, throw a lob, get an easy two, get someone who's going to do a poke steal and get the ball into the backcourt and run in and dunk it like Bembry. Set the game up. Set games up where you're giving people body blows and then you're ending games downhill. Like I don't think Steve Nash could even, I think he could close games with that lineup that I suggested. I don't think Steve Nash could start games like that. There'd be too much pressure to play Patty Mills or Joe Harris. But the other reason why I like them not starting is that you can go to rotations where you never have an offensive deficit. You don't need more offensive scoring in the lineup when you have Kyrie, KD, and James Harden. You don't need more. You almost need, guys to just keep people honest, like someone you could throw a lob to.
Right.
I don't know, man. I love that lineup. Do you think in any way does Steve Nash apply any of my crazy ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I totally think so. I actually think your the initial group that you came up with. Look, I mean, I think Harris will probably still be the starter, but in a lot of ways,
yeah,
I think against like a team like the I think in a lot of ways with a team like the Bucks, I think that lineup with Bembry and Claxton, I actually think it makes sense.
And that's who I'm thinking about. Like, I'm thinking about, you can't stop Giannis, right? But you definitely can't stop Giannis with Joe Harris. But with Bembry, you at least could get him off of his game a little bit. Like, give him something to think about so that in the late part of the game, you know what I mean? When it's just going to be like, can you catch us? Can you keep us from scoring? And can we keep, and can you score enough to make a run at us? And if you could play that five, that